nav link wrapper, let's come down and let's start adding some more class styles. So now I'm going to say nav, and let me just copy this. So nav link wrapper, but now at the end, I'm going to say a space and then an A. So what we're doing here is we're saying inside of the nav link wrapper, I just want you to grab the A link. Now we didn't have to go through all of this kind of syntax, just mainly because we're just using a single selector. We're just saying I want the nav link wrapper with the A link. And so now inside of here, I want to add a little bit different color. So here the color I'm going to add is start with a hash and then say 8A, just like that. And so that's giving us kind of a light gray. And then also, if you may have noticed right here, this underline looks kind of ugly. This is the basic HTML underline. And you may have noticed here, we have this cool little underline that is spaced out. The way that you can accomplish this is actually by telling HTML to not have an underline at all, and then we're going to use the bottom border attribute in order to manage that style. So what I want to do here is I want to say text decoration none, and then here I'm going to say transition color, and then I'm going to say same thing, 0.5 seconds. So half a second here. So what we're doing is we're setting it up so that we can have two animations, because we want to animate the color. We also want to animate that border bottom. So now if we hit refresh, the only difference is the underline's gone, and then we also have changed the color. So we know everything's working, but we still have to implement the rest of those styles. Okay, and switching back, believe it or not, we only actually have two more style definitions to add in order to finish the nav bar. So I'm going to say here, we want to now have our hover states. So as you may have noticed, if you look at the final version, this set of styles changes based on the hover action. So in CSS, you have the ability to tell the browser when the hover state occurs, I want you to change the styles. So I'm going to say nav link wrapper and then add a colon and hover. That's a way that you tell CSS that you want to use one of these. They're called pseudo states. So we want to check for when hover occurs. And when that happens, this is where we're going to change that border bottom. So now I'm going to say border bottom, 1 pixel, solid, and then we can just say black. Hit save. And now let's just come here and do the same thing, except it's not going to be the border bottom. It's actually going to be the color. So here, and it's not going to be on the wrapper itself. And I'm going to explain why in a second. So I'm going to say nav link wrapper A, and then inside of it, color, and then black. So this may look a little bit tricky because technically you may have noticed we have two different hover states, one for the link, one for the div itself. But I'm going to show you why that is here. So if I hit refresh, now you can see that's working perfectly. You notice how we have the cool little animation, and we also have it fading in and out as opposed to what we had before, where it was just that ugly text decoration. So this is matching up perfectly. Now if you notice also these fonts are different, the reason for that is because we haven't imported the font we're going to go with at the end. So right now this is just the ugly basic HTML font. Eventually we're going to add in our own custom one, but that is working perfectly. So great job if you've gotten to this point. You now know how to build out a full nav bar using Flexbox. So now that that is crossed off the list, let's move down and start building out the portfolio items. So this is going to be what takes up the majority of the screen real estate. So this is going to obviously be an important part of it. So we'll come back here and I'm going to switch back, and I'm actually going to come to the very top Part of the reason why I didn't do this in the beginning is because it really wasn't the right time for it. But at the very top, I'm going to put my kind of master styles here. So I'm going to select the entire body. What this is going to do is it's going to grab the body of the HTML document, and I want to add a margin of 0 pixels. So what that's going to do is, by default, the body has a margin of, I believe it's 8 pixels. And so in order to get rid of that, we have to override that. So now if you come back, hit refresh, you don't see a huge difference because the background's white, but this did remove that margin. You could kind of see those move back a little bit. So that's why we're removing it, because if you notice, we want these images here, the portfolio item images, butting up against the side of the page. So we need that. Now we also are now going to be introduced to CSS Grid. So CSS Grid has a lot of similarities to Flexbox. It is a tool built in directly into CSS, and it gives you the ability to align items. Now there are a number of differences between the two. We definitely don't have time to go into all the differences. Hopefully, as you see as I'm building this out, some of those differences will be made apparent. My kind of rule of thumb is I like to have my layouts in Grid, and I like to build out my small elements like my nav bars using Flexbox. That's my personal preference. Everyone is a little bit different. But we are going to lay out our entire application using Grid. And so that is where we're going to grab that container class that we created. And now I'm going to say display grid, and I'm going to say grid template columns 1FR. Now that may look weird if you've never seen that before. What we're doing is we're saying, I want the container to use Grid, and then I want you to create these template columns using 1FR, which stands for fractional unit. So what that means is that our entire layout now is going to be considered as having columns, even though you can't really see them. If I come here, one of the nice things about Google Chrome and Firefox, if you hover over, do you see those little dotted lines there? That's telling us that that is one of the columns. So just like how Flexbox was able to take those div elements and separate them out, Grid does the same thing. And when you say 1FR, that means 100%. It means I want you to take up one fractional unit, which means this column of the nav bar should go from end to end, just like our portfolio items should go from end to end. So that's how that works. So now everything that we add below here is going to be considered in that next row down below it. So that's all the styles that we actually need to add to our container class. And so now let's move all the way down. And so now what we're going to do is be able to start building out all of the portfolio styles. So I'm going to just kind of give us, and this is just kind of a best practice. Here I'm going to add some comments. So I'm going to say master styles. And then here I'll say these are our nav styles. And then if you come all the way down to the bottom, these are going to be our portfolio styles. Hit save, and now what we can do is actually jump back into the index now that we know where those styles are going to go. And now we can go right, notice where nav wrapper, notice where it has its closing tag. Now what we can do is come and we can do the exact same thing we did with our HTML on the top nav bar. Now we can do that for the portfolios. So I'm going to create a wrapper here. So I'm going to say content wrapper. And then inside of here, I'm going to create another wrapper called portfolio items wrapper. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it's very important that you keep your naming consistent. So here, all of the portfolio items are going to go inside of it. I'm also going to have this in a singular form. So here I'm going to create, let me give us a little more room so we can see it. And let me close this div off.